Hey everyone, welcome to this week's 10-Minute Trends hosted by Direct Agents. My name is Megan Conahan. I'm an EVP at Direct Agents.
I'm Jackson Richards, Director of Strategy with Direct Agents.
Okay, before we get started, I did want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Unless you guys know, you probably missed us last week, but we are moving these 10-Minute Trends to bi-weekly. So our next 10-Minute Trends after this one will be on July 29th, and all of the calendar invites should be updated accordingly. Okay, so we can get started. As always, if there are any questions, please feel free to chat them to us and we will do our best to answer them if we have some time. So we have 4 big topics today. One, updates on COVID-19 consumer trends, retail stagnant return, some paid media updates, and then finally, Peacock is launching. So let's just get started. So Jackson, COVID-19 cases continue to increase pretty much every week, every day, and this is having some really interesting effects on just consumer trends and digital efficiencies. So can you just touch quickly on, what you're seeing and what's happening for brands and what they should be doing?
Sure. So, first we'll start with this chart. We showed this, probably most recently, maybe a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. What this shows is we're tracking basically people's mobility, how much they're moving around the country, around their cities, states, and mapping that against how many new COVID cases are happening in our country. So, initially, of course, we saw in March and April as cases first started to peak and rise, states were shut down, economies were shut down, people stopped moving around. Mobility was incredibly limited. Now both are increasing. So we've seen a huge increase in cases and not really much of a slowdown in terms of people traveling, especially, within their cities, states, getting back out there, going to restaurants and things like that. I think there's a few reasons for that. It's summertime, people have been, cooped up for a few months, but we're seeing just a very different sort of scenario than we were a few months ago. If we go to the next slide, I think this paints a bigger picture of what's happening with brands and consumer behaviors in terms of shopping. So as more people are going out again, we're still seeing online spending increasing. So what we're seeing here is that same mobility index, but tracked against Google Analytics revenue per session across our database of media campaigns and media partners. So really what this is a proxy for online shopping behaviors and how much it's increasing or decreasing. And what we're seeing is that it is continuing to slowly increase despite people being able to go out and shop more in retail, go into restaurants, things like that than they were able to a few months ago. Mm-hmm. And when we look in states that have been more completely reopened versus states that are still more largely restricted, the states that are more restricted have higher revenue per session. So there's more online spending going on in the more restricted states. And I think that points to a few things. One, there's still a greater reliance on digital services in those places. And delivery, things like that are just more essential, while retail options are more limited. But I think we're also just seeing retail's return be a little bit more gradual than expected. So really what I think this points to is brands, even as things are reopening, brands need to double down and really, kind of shore up their digital initiatives, making sure they have really a lot of flexibility in terms of the way that their customers are able to shop with them and engage with them, because the return of retail, as we'll see in just a second, has been rocky. So
yeah.
No,
I was going to say, a few weeks back, we were just talking about some of the upticks in retail, and that has all really changed since the virus cases have kind of increased. So, why don't you kind of continue that conversation about, what's going on with retail and then how brands are pivoting, right? Because a lot of brands have kind of a dual e-com or D2C and retail presence. So what are they doing?
Yeah. So, in April, we saw retail foot traffic essentially fall off a cliff. It was down 83% year over year. And for the last, couple months, we've seen that slowly starting to return. For the week that was ending June 20th, retail foot traffic was down just 34%. So still a lot year over year, but nothing like it was in April when it was down 83%. But now for a recent week in July, it was back down to 39%. So it hasn't been this kind of steady return to last year's levels. We're seeing that it's going to be inconsistent. It's going to be rocky as cases rise. COVID cases rise around the country. I think people are getting a little bit more cautious. And we still have yet to see what's going to happen in the fall. So, I think there are a lot of brands that were really quick to pivot to shore up with their digital services, how they're able to facilitate e-commerce. And I think there was a lot of brands that were really hopeful that this summer, that retail would come back. And I think those brands are going to be kind of in a difficult position right now, as we're seeing that return of retail is going to be inconsistent and unpredictable. So, it's never too late if you're a brand that has not really committed to pivoting your business to being digital first. Yesterday is the time you should have done that, but today is the second best. And I think the brands that have really thought about how, what are some innovative or flexible ways, whether it's virtual try-ons for if you're an apparel company or things like that, to increase delivery services, try on, return, things like that. The brands that are just really thinking about flexibility from a digital perspective are the ones that are going to be successful in the long term.
Yeah. And that kind of takes us to our third topic, which is kind of the media landscape. And man, Jackson, I mean, there's just so much going on the media side of things between you have the Facebook boycott, you have Blackout Tuesday, and then also increasing COVID cases. It's just making kind of performance and KPIs, they're just all over the place right now. So can you talk a little bit about what some of those things we're seeing from like a KPI or CPC, CPM, like what is happening out there? And then how can brands really capitalize on some of the trends that are going on right now to get a little bit more efficient media?
Sure. So it's been a little while since probably a month, maybe two, since we've shown these charts. As a refresher, across the board, generally Google CPCs, Facebook CPMs are down and have been for a few months. At the beginning of the pandemic, Google CPCs actually spiked quite a bit. I think that there was a lot of people just like doing Google searches, like quite frankly, new shopping behaviors, people figuring out how to do these things. I think that led to a short-term increase in demand on that platform. But at the same time, Facebook CPMs kind of tanked and have remained low. I think there was a kind of an increase in optimism around Memorial Day as cases were starting to go down and summer was coming, and we saw more advertisers starting to increase around then and CPM starting to rise. But I think that has largely faded, and we're seeing that advertising costs across both Facebook and Google are down significantly, especially on the Facebook side year over year, and have not really returned. And then, to compound Facebook's, issues, there's been a large boycott that we've talked about in these webinars over the last few weeks. So, I think, brands that are still kind of deciding whether or not to advertise with Facebook and Instagram right now. But for those that they're definitely experiencing lower advertising costs and are probably able to reach more of the potential customers than they were, in other instances. But across the board, we're definitely seeing brands kind of diversify their media mix. Maybe taking a step back from Facebook and Instagram and pushing budget into other advertising platforms, Twitter, Reddit, even TikTok and Snapchat.
Yeah, I guess a quick follow-up question is like the reduction in CPMs that we continue to see. Do you think that is more a factor of COVID or the boycott?
I think it's probably more so, and it's due to the pandemic, because we've seen, if you look at this chart, it's kind of remained low consistently. Yes, the boycott has been significant. There have been a handful of very large companies that have decided to pull out of Facebook advertising either for a month or indefinitely. But Facebook has millions and millions of advertisers. So, even though there's some big brands that have pulled out, they have plenty of advertisers. Not saying that there's no effect. I think there's probably more of an impact though in the dialogue around the company rather than in their ad costs.
Got it. Okay, and then final topic is Peacock is launching. So, this is something that we've been talking about internally, but with so many competitors in the streaming space, how are they even going to stand out? It's such a crowded market. I already have, like 5 to 10 of my own streaming services. Are people really going to adopt this, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, so for those of you, sorry, who know direct agents well, you know that we work a lot in the streaming space, and so we have a lot of kind of insight into what's going on with the latest launch of NBC's Peacock. For those that are not yet familiar, and in a second we'll talk about why we think that's probably a lot of you guys. NBCU's Peacock streaming service has finally launched nationwide after a soft launch in recent weeks for Comcast customers. But it's going to be a mix of new content, new and exclusive content for that platform, as well as classics and fan favorites, things like The Office, SNL, 30 Rock, and then also Universal Pictures library. So like the Fast and Furious franchise, Jurassic Park franchise, things like that. And there's 3 tiers for members. So one is free. You don't get all of the content, but it's completely free, supported by ads. There's a $4.99 a month tier that has more content and will have limited advertisements. And then there's the $9.99 a month premium tier with no commercials at all, and you get all of the content. So really, I think Peacock, where there's the biggest opportunity for them, is potentially to be the biggest player in the ad-supported free space. So the other major services, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Hulu, Netflix, they've all kind of carved out their space in the more premium subscription tier. Mm-hmm. But Peacock has been largely, with a lot of good content for free, which is not saying that all other services have, but there's going to be challenges even in the free tier. So Viacom has recently invested in Pluto TV. Fox has a deal with Tubi. So there's going to be a lot of competition. And even though NBC is a huge company with the backing of Comcast, I think their largest uphill battle is going to be in awareness. So if you look at the chart on the right, you'll see that compared to many other streaming services, they are really struggling right now out of the gate with awareness. Now, they have plenty of time to grow awareness, so it's not it's not necessarily all bad that they don't have the awareness of like an HBO Max just yet. But they were hoping to launch alongside the Olympics, and now that that's being postponed, they're relying primarily on paid advertising to get the word out. They've adopted a strategy similar to similar to Disney Plus, where they've gradually built awareness through paid advertisements over a number of weeks, and then really peaked advertising spending in the week up to launch. So we'll see what happens over the course of the next few weeks. It's definitely a crowded market, but one thing we've seen, especially over the last month with all of us spending a lot more time at home, is that you run out of things to watch really quickly, and there's, people are always looking for new things to watch and new services to try. So it's a crowded space, but it's a space that's still growing. And I think, especially in the free advertising supported space, Peacock has an opportunity to carve out a space for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of new services, we were just talking before this about Walmart Plus, but we are a little bit out of time right now. So we will touch on that more in 2 weeks, 10-minute trends. As always, thank you for joining us. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to email marketing@directagents.com. Thank you so much, Jackson. And we will talk to you all in a couple weeks.